Afghanistan has a natural beauty, with all its mountains and rivers close to the cities. It may be one of the most beautiful countries in Asia.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Atheist Apostate, your host the AA, and we are back with something different here. So we are back with another episode of Now You Know, but we are going to make this one a longer one, dealing with Afghanistan and why the conflict in Afghanistan is what it is today, why the people are suffering. And as much as I'm a huge fan of the Apostate Prophet, I agree with him about this much in his recent video on the conflict and disagree with him this much. I think he's jaded by his view of the apologists. I think he's jaded on his view of the religion. And not jaded on it, but I think his anger and his knowledge of their bullshit has jaded him on the members themselves who are suffering. And this is why I'm doing this video. This is what he has to say, and we will find out the rest.
People don't want to point this out, but when we're talking about Afghanistan, we're not talking about a country whose population desperately wants to be secular and free, but which is forced and oppressed by an extremist group like the Taliban.
Yes and no. They don't want to be secular. Correct. They don't. They want to be Islamic. Correct. They do not want to be under the yoke of a fascist, a dictatorship, as militant and extremist as these guys. Dictatorship's okay. So having a theocracy is okay, but not to the extremists that the Taliban is.
No, we're talking about a country whose population mostly wants to be ruled by strict Islamic laws.
I have a dream to have my country back. But you think that's too much? That's too big?
This lady here, this poor lady here, grew up before the 1973 conflict where the Muslim Soviets took over. So she grew up in a different life before the 70s on and the conflict that we have now. And she and many other people are going to be the people we are using to talk about and why this is not what they chose and not what they want.
When Taliban beat me on the street, it was very difficult. I had a proper burqa. I hide my beautiful hands with nail polish.
You heard what AP said. They chose this. This is their fault. So they wanted this, and that the Westerners, because Muslims wanted to live by Islamic law. She's saying she was following the Islamic law. She was following Sharia law. Listen to her.
They shouldn't see it. They beat me and they say why I am on the street without male member of my family, without my mahram. I'm not saying I was very problematic.
Yeah, she's going to be problematic. She knows she is, I know she is, they know she was. Yet I say, hey, go for it, girl. She had balls for it.
But I love to answer them. I say, I tried to find someone from second-hand market, but I couldn't. And that was, they start beating me.
That was challenging their authority and mocking them. She knew it, they knew it, I know it, you guys know it. But she had the balls to do it.
Extra. In the middle of the street, in front of probably 400 eyes. Or 500, for no reason.
In Afghanistan, there was no segregation between men and women.
This is someone who grew up pre-1973, who was there before the Islamic Communist Party, the Muslim Communist Party, which changed things around. We got to know that. Before 73, they were a liberalized country living under Islamic law.
Honestly, I was focusing on my studies, but I was quite, I was a little naughty. I would say we were going to cinemas, we were skipping some classes.
We saw the French movies. We saw Europe and America through movie, but we never thought to go to America or go to Europe because we were happy in Kabul. You know, we read history in school. And always, of course, we thought Afghans are very brave people, you know. We fought against British, we fought against Genghis Khan, we fought against Alexander the Great, you know. And war was something very far away from us.
War was something far away from us. She's pre-1973 Muslim Communist Party, where Afghanistan was very liberal.
For me.
Kabul was a totally different place. You can't believe and even you can't imagine. It was better than Europe.
Better than Europe. They were seeing westernized movies, they were wearing westernized clothing, they were getting an education, they thought it was better than Europe. And let's hear what AP has to say.
I guess.
And trying to help or trying to impose our way of living on people who really don't like America, who really don't like the West, and who don't want any of this.
And no, they don't want any of the westernized philosophy of life, as in a democracy of non-theology. They wanted a theologic country. The Quran was their belief, Sharia law. So, but they were not extremist in the law.
Rural Afghanistan, home to 80% of the population, was a world away from Kabul, and one in which many were uncomfortable with these changes.
And this is important. This is important because this is going to be where the future Taliban comes out of. It's important we know this. And that's why this is going to be Now You Know, because AP doesn't give you the full story. AP, I do like you. I think you're a great guy, but I think your hate and distaste for Islam falls over onto those members because of apologetic Muslims. I have Islamic family. Trust me, I know your grief. I know how freaking annoying and irritable they are. I get it. But you were brainwashed in it too, so you got to see that. So these people were brainwashed in it, and not everyone wanted this. You're looking at 73 on. You're not looking at the struggles before 73 and then from 73 to 92. And we're going to cover that because it makes a big difference on his statements.
Here people followed tribal traditions and the teachings of Islam. Women were often isolated and could be bought and sold into marriage. The Muslim clerics were worried about developments in the capital.
When you look at Afghanistan, as soon as the American forces retreat, step back, get out, a major force like the Taliban, which was supposed to be the major enemy in the region, rapidly takes over the entire country. And that doesn't happen because they are so powerful and nobody can stop them.
Agreed.
We were sort of asleep in those days.
They were sort of asleep in those days. And why were they sort of asleep in those days? Let's find out.
Even we didn't see the reality, unfortunately, because of our class differences.
Because of their class differences. As you heard, in Afghanistan, in the big cities, Kabul and Mosul and all those, they were more westernized with the royal monarchy. They had more freedoms. In the rural countries, they were more extreme to the laws of Islam.
Also in response to the Western lifestyle of the Kabul elite, the early 70s saw the founding of the first Islamic organizations in the country.
First Islamic organizations in the country, in protest to the liberalness of the monarchy.
Their aim? To defend traditional lifestyles. It was the birth of political Islamism in Afghanistan.
And
It
never
happens
stopped.
because there is not very much resistance within the country.
Former Vice
And he says this happened because there wasn't much resistance. From 1973 to current, there's been resistance. And let's hear what's happening currently in Afghanistan.
President of Afghanistan, Abdullah Saleh, declared via Twitter that he is the legitimate caretaker president, according to the country's constitution, after the deposed Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani, fled the nation. Saleh has urged the Afghan public to resist the armed Taliban.
He's trying to fight back. He's claiming the authority. So, according to the Constitution, and he's trying to fight back and urging the members, do not let the people of Afghanistan, do not let the Taliban win. because he knows that's not what the people want.
The sudden withdrawal of U.S. troops is also raising concerns various insurgents could stage a comeback.
People don't want to point this out, but when we're talking about Afghanistan, we're not talking about a country whose population desperately wants to be secular and free.
True. They still want to live under a Islamic law, just not extreme.
But which is forced and oppressed by an extremist group like the Taliban. No.
And we saw the First Lady getting beat because she was out without a husband. So we're going to see another example shortly of another Muslim who is following Sharia law, but not to their taste, get beat too.
No, we're talking about a country whose population mostly wants to be ruled by strict Islamic laws. Yes, even Donald Trump pointed this out several years ago. The vast majority of the population of Afghanistan wants to be ruled with
We're going to go...
those who...
They put Muslims and plus Islam in a very narrow road. That's why Afghanistan society in the early 70s was being spread badly with two groups.
Two groups. And listen to who the groups are. I'm not making any of this up. This is historical.
Islamic and communists, so left and right.
Left and
The
right.
Islamic movement was blaming like the communists that they are saying this, and they were blaming, this blaming game between left and right political ideology was start from the very beginning, which is both of them were extremely immature.
The communists overthrew the cousin to the king of Afghanistan, overthrew them, and he was the first leader of the Communist Party that took over.
Unmature to lead the country, unmature to guide the people, unmature to keep the great value of national unity among the people.
Taking everybody by surprise, the Afghan communists managed to take power.
See?
First, in 1973, they supported a military coup to overthrow the monarchy.
And it was by the cousin of the king.
The country was proclaimed a republic, with its first ever president.
And this is important here. This is the Communist Party.
In
right
1979, amid growing public dissent towards the communist regime, Islamic activists organized an armed insurgency. Its members called themselves Mujahideen.
Mujahideen. For those who are my age, about 42 to 40 and older, 42 and older, you should remember this. This was the Russian-Afghani war. It was on our TV in Canada nightly.
Fighters of the Holy War.
This revolution is an Islamic revolution, and it has its special aims and goals, which is to establish a pure Islamic system in Afghanistan, freedom of Afghanistan, and liberation of Afghanistan.
So he's saying pretty much what AP said. They don't want a westernized form of government. They never have. They want a Islamic form. And the Communist Party was given more of a secular form. And they did not like that. They were going to oust them because, in their opinion, they were just as bad, if not worse than the royals. Because the communists, when they took over, arrested over 10,000 people, including all the clerics and all religious teachers. So, because they were against them. And that's why this group rose up.
In Moscow, Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev was worried. Afghanistan was a neighboring communist state, and a successful Islamic revolution could, in his eyes, send a dangerous message to the 50 million Muslims living in the USSR. So he decided to send in troops to restore order.
To help out the Muslim Communist Party that was in control and about to get their butts into a war with a guerrilla faction that was calling a jihad.
Soviet troops have been arriving in increasing numbers since early December. Then, on Christmas Eve, the arrivals increased
I was
dramatically.
2 years old.
Dead to Russian, get out of our country, and so on.
You hear that? That's what the people there were putting on. Long live Islam. They did not want the Russians. They did not want the North Americans. They did not want the British. True. They wanted their own self-Islamic rule with liberty and freedom.
In Washington, the United States was quick to react to the Soviet offensive.
The Soviets were in a Cold War, if we all recall, with the United States of America. A Cold War. We already heard that. Let's hear what's going to happen here.
Remote Afghanistan became the new epicenter of the Cold War.
This invasion is an extremely serious threat to peace. A Soviet-occupied Afghanistan is a stepping stone to possible control over much of the world's oil supplies.
Over the oil supplies, Iran. So Saudi Arabia, you got over here Iraq, going through Iraq, you have down on the bottom these little countries, Kuwait, rich oil countries, and that's what Jimmy Carter was worried about, was that Russia in the Cold War did not get a hold of the oil supplies.
Seeing a chance to weaken the Soviet Union, Washington started supporting the Mujahideen with money and weapons.
With money and weapons, these backwards country people who believe in a strict form of Islam, so are getting funded with money and weapons by the CIA and the United States of America, and here's their justification for it. Let's hear their freaking justification from their UN National Security Advisor.
In Pakistan, US National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski appealed to the Afghans' religious pride.
Well, that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day.
Manipulating
your
them.
fight will prevail, and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again. Because your cause is right, God is on your side.
God is on your side, so we can make sure the Russians don't get the oil.
Bought many guns?
Yes.
For Afghanistan?
Yes, many guns.
How many?
About 30,000.
30,000?
Yes.
That's a lot of rupees. Where's the money come from?
This come America.
From America?
Yes.
Does that not look familiar to us, that last scene of them sitting around in their desert clothes praising Allah? This is how we got to the Taliban. This is how we got to ISIL. This is how we got to today's situation, which we're trying to understand why we're in a situation like today. So let's go back over here and hear this.
Two jihadi leaders were being very famous, and I heard different stories about them. One was Bulbulin Hekmatyar. He's one of the powerful one, and he had lots of soldiers.
I remember his name getting brought up before, but what we're going to hear soon is this guy I remember the face of, not this guy. But
and the second was Ahmad Shah Massoud.
Massoud was on news nightly. U.S. backed, U.S. funded, U.S. trained, so to fight the Islamic Muslim Communist Party and Russia. So this face I know very well, seeing on the news every night.
Ahmad Shah Massoud, perhaps the most gifted guerrilla leader in the whole of Afghanistan. Although he's only one of 5 or 6 major Afghan resistance leaders, he's the best known.
Comment Massoud, les téléspectateurs occidentaux doivent se demander comment une petite vallée comme la vôtre, avec 5000 hommes mais seulement 700 armes, arrive à tenir en échec l'armée réputée la plus puissante du monde, l'armée rouge.
Okay, so I understand French. So I grew up with French and English, so I switched over there so you can read it. So as well, and let's go back and hear why.
La première chose, c'est la l'aide de Dieu.
The law of God.
Et la deuxième chose, c'est que nous Moudjahid, tous c'est très courageux.
When I was 14, Massoud was very important for me. He's climbing in the mountains.
He's important for a lot of people who were my age and older, because we were told, and the propaganda was, he was going to get the Russians, the bad Russians, the communists, out of Afghanistan.
Killing the Russians. And it was like a dream to just meet him and help him and follow his paths.
Allahu Akbar gofta. Fayda shuru ko.
They encourage more women to come and sing on the stages.
And this is the Communist Party. She's about to compare the Communist Party with the U.S.-backed financially and weaponry group. So let's hear this.
They were talking about more women's freedom, but unfortunately from the Mujahideen side, there was nothing for women except beating them up.
U.S. funded, U.S. weaponry given to them.
And should have hijab and should not work, should not do anything. When the government was saying education for women, they said no education. Freedom for women, no freedom for women. So it was, women actually was used as a political tool by both sides.
Oh, let's go back here so you can read this. So, because I'm able to read in French. And this is a French, another French program.
Then the war reached Kabul as well. The Mujahideen used terrorist attacks to create instability and weaken the occupiers.
There was a bomb explosion. And my first grade teacher that I loved dearly, she got killed with her 12-year-old son.
And we're going a little back here. So we've already got the royals taken. The communists are now in power. The rebels are trying to get the communists out of power. And this is the daughter of the president of the Communist Party and Afghanistan speaking.
And that's when then the whole notion of, oh, the terrorists are those that kill came very obvious for me. And the way they killed was through putting pens on the streets, on the markets, toys. There were mines. So we used to have classes in school, actually, that taught us, for example, not to touch or take anything that's interesting on the street.
And this is the U.S.-backed group doing this. This is the rebel group doing these horrible crimes, all in the name of the Cold War and to keep Russia from possibly gaining access to oil.
Like a teddy bear or a doll.
Fucking hell.
Since the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, nearly 3 million Afghans have poured across Pakistan's long, unguarded border.
Okay, we heard AP say people had their chance to get out, and they should have got out when they had their chance, and they're pretty much getting what they deserve. These are people who are trying to get out in the 1970s. Or 1980s, sorry.
In Afghanistan. I have to escape from Afghanistan, our lovely country, to go to the Pakistan, to join with our brother and Muslim brother.
People.
Let's hear what AP has to say. Let's hear this.
Muslim brother.
People in Afghanistan who want to be free and who want to live a secular, beautiful life should have left Afghanistan long ago.
And they did try, and some did get out. Let's hear more.
Many of them did leave. Many of them live peaceful lives in other countries.
They live peaceful lives in other countries. Let's hear what type of lives they're living in Pakistan and other countries like Iran.
Were smuggled by different people. They came in a very difficult way. The people lost their children on the way. The people lost their member of the families on the way to either to Pakistan or to Iran.
They lost people they loved trying to flee the country and get to refugee camps. Not better lives, but refugee camps.
Many of them are in the West because they don't want the strict Islamist way of life.
Let's go look at the camps. The ones who can get to the West, those who can get to the camps. Refugee camp, Peshawar, Pakistan. So this is where the hotbed of our terrorist group, the Taliban, stems from.
Pakistani border towns like Peshawar hosted hundreds of thousands of Afghan refugees and became hotspots of resistance. There, the Mujahideen acquired the money and weapons they needed.
From the United States of America, we heard earlier where they got the money and the weapons from.
and a Saudi who would later achieve global notoriety, also set up camp here.
Remember we heard not too long ago, five to six different leaders. I'm not focusing much on Osama. I don't want to get on him too much, but he is a part of the story.
Osama bin Laden. He recruited and supported the foreign fighters coming from all over the Arab world to join the Afghan jihad. Radical Islam spread in the refugee camps, where children were subjected to a campaign of indoctrination.
The vast majority of the population of Afghanistan wants to be ruled with Islamic Sharia law.
All these Arabs who were involved, I mean, I seen it. In all the camps, they build madrasas, the religious schools, so-called. The Afghan families give the male children to these madrasas to be educated, to be fed.
So he's talking about a country nowadays, who has, their generation has grown up between the Communist Party and going through almost 15 or 20 years of a war with Russia, because that started in the 70s. They were backed by Russia in the 70s. In the 80s, the Russians came into 89. So before pulling back out, that's all they knew. They were raised in refugee camps, these people that moved back. They were raised in refugee camps, and what were they taught in these refugee camps?
Then they were kept over there to segregate them, to train them, to brainwash them. They were the ones who became Taliban.
They were the ones who become Taliban. Let's go back here so you can see that. These are the future people who became Taliban members. And this is the people that became the leaders of the Taliban. So they became those who were influenced. They were thrown into camps. They lost their parents. They lost their family. Those who didn't, they were pulled away from their family by U.S. funded and U.S. backed groups.
The vast majority of people in Afghanistan believes that women must be veiled, that it is an obligation to spread Islam to others, that people who leave Islam should be punished with death, that adultery should be punished with death, and so on.
Yes, and you understand why? You understand why? Because of these camps and their families having to flee from the war, they got brainwashed into this ideology.
Those people in Afghanistan who want to be free and who want to live a secular, beautiful life should have left Afghanistan long ago.
No, they shouldn't have had. They shouldn't have had to.
And many of them did leave. Many of them live peaceful lives in other countries, including many of them are in the West, because they don't want the strict Islamist way of life. Those who
Let's go back to that here.
Other countries, including many of them are in the West, because they don't want the strict Islamist way of life.
Okay, and those people, let's be clear here, those people he's talking about, those people, and who we're going to see some of, are the people that were raised in these camps, that were orphaned into these camps, that were brainwashed in these camps. Because with every drop, another mujahid will rise. And that was the type of man. These were the men who were brainwashing today's generation of Taliban. So, of today's generation of Muslims. These were the people, U.S. funded and backed, who got us to where we are today. So, I'm sorry to say it, Americans, but you gotta know your history. We know it, you don't.
Politics is always dirty. And the countries who are involved, they choose the most conservative group of people and train them and made them monsters.
The most conservative group.
Just to get rid of this USSR.
Made them into monsters just to get rid of the USSR and protect their oil. Disgusting, disgusting, disgusting.
Сталкиваться лицом к лицу с врагом.
Here, let's go back. let's go here. Let's go and see what's being said. I understand French, you don't probably.
Сталкиваться лицом к лицу с врагом. Приходится стрелять в людей, не по мишеням. Приходится их убивать. Вот в Акуте я по случаю до сих пор я ничего не понял. Понятно, минимум населения.
I can't tell who the civilians and who are the enemies.
Afghanistan.
So, even the soldiers trying to fight against them, not even sure if the population or the enemy are the enemy.
Cost the Soviet Union dearly in terms of men, money, and political capital. In 1986, the new leader in Moscow, Mikhail Gorbachev, decided to withdraw his country's forces.
The Soviet Union today formally agreed to pull its troops out of Afghanistan.
And remember where we heard AP talking about little resistance? This has been a historical thing in the last 50 years. Let's watch what's being said here. Let's go actually to here.
We saw the last Soviet soldier lift the country. We were being like, oh God, finally, they left and we won the war. This is the chapter close, and the new chapter will start.
They thought it was done and over with. The Russians and the Communist Party of Islamic Communist Party were beat. They were forced. They were done with. Finally, the Mujahideen were finally going to restore proper Islamic order and liberty back to the country again like it was. That's what they thought was about to happen. And let's find out what really happened.
But the good one feels so free. It's like, breathe back, and this is the country back. But lots of bad things happen.
A lot of bad things happen.
Against the odds, the Mujahideen had defeated the Soviet army. The occupiers were gone, but Kabul was still in the hands of a communist government. The final obstacle to be overcome for those wanting to establish an Islamic Republic.
So we heard the Russians are gone. They've got the Russians out there. Now they got to get rid of the party that is ran by the communists. They're next to go off, and we're going to see what's going to happen here. So let's see how our US-funded, US-backed group does.
For the Afghans, the war was not yet over.
In Afghanistan, the faithful Mujahideen are fighting to establish a pure Islamic government, and they are selflessly offering their lives, taking up arms in order to establish a foundation for the Sharia of Islam and the fundamental Islamic way.
For the Shi'aric law, so for the Shi'aric law, the fundamental way of Islam, and people were excited for that. They thought they were going to get true Islam coming back, but what did they get?
As a child, I would have nightmares of having Gulbuddin Hikmatyar standing in front of my gate with a gun, and I'm pretending that I'm dead.
There have been conflicting reports from Afghanistan today about the whereabouts of President Najibullah. Last night, several hundred troops who recently defected from the government took control of Kabul airport and were reported to have prevented Dr. Najibullah from leaving the capital.
A defection from the government. So those who were in his party defected and went over to the U.S. backside when they saw there was no hope left and turncoated. And we're going to see this is a historical thing for this group.
It's now thought he's taken refuge at a United Nations office in Kabul and has resigned from all his posts in government.
That history will prove one day that I stood for a right cause.
What the people of Afghanistan need is more sympathy in economic assistance, not more bumps and guns.
So he's pleading for a stop to the violence. He wants no more violence, and look what happens.
Once in Kabul, the Mujahideen had the chance to fulfill their dream and build an independent Islamic Afghanistan. But instead, different groups started fighting one another in a battle for control.
So they went into civil war, and this is where Osama bin Laden comes in because his group was one of these groups fighting Biden. So the U.S.-backed force here is about to get themselves in a little bit of trouble, and let's see what happens.
They attack extra rockets during civil war. Start from Hekmatyar and then Massoud. They both were fighting.
They used us to kill one another. It's like two cowards were at war. Instead of confronting each other, they grabbed women and children and hid in civilians' houses.
And this is why I have to disagree with AP, that Muslims in Afghanistan wanted this. They want this. They want the Americans out. Yes, they want the Americans out. Yes, they want Islamic control, and they want a Islamic state, but a fair Islamic state, not an extremist view of the Islamic state like they were about to find out they're about to get.
When my father decided that we had to leave, I didn't even know that I was leaving. Because when we left for holidays was when I met my father last. I said bye and I got in the car, and then he looked at me and goes, "You didn't give me a hug." And then he said, "Just make sure that you learn English very well because you need to come back and help me with it."
Déserté par les Occidentaux.
And let's see what this has to say here. What happens soon as just after she, her dad saw her?
Help me with it.
Déserté par les Occidentaux.
Afghan isolated by the
Ambassade
world.
britannique fermée. Ambassade des États-Unis fermée. Ambassade de France fermée.
The U.S. created this situation. The U.S. set up this group. The U.S. created these atrocities by funding this group, and they pulled out their army, their embassy, along with everyone else. To leave the Afghani people to civil war. And let's see what happens here.
Mon sentiment, c'est que l'ONU et les puissances occidentales s'intéressaient à l'Afghanistan tant que nous nous battions contre l'URSS, contre le communisme. C'était l'ennemi commun.
Then their interests completely disappeared after fighting the communists.
Ensuite, l'intérêt a complètement chuté.
They abandoned us.
Ont laissé tomber.
The issue is, I have always favored the idea that America should get out of those countries, should stop being involved in conflicts in Islamic countries, because it.
And yet we hear Mossad in '92. Mossad pissed off, blaming the U.S. for abandoning them, so that the U.S. was only interested in helping them and funding them and training them while Russia was there to fight Russia, and he felt betrayed. Yet AP believes they should have never been there in the first place. So the group that was about to lose to the Taliban wanted the Americans there to keep on helping and supporting them. They're pissed off because they now had to fight against other groups.
It is of no use to anybody anymore.
Well, here, let's so you guys can see this. Let's read what, and this is back into 1992 again.
I have always favored the idea that America should get out of those countries, should stop being involved in conflicts in Islamic countries, because it is of no use to anybody anymore.
Why? There's war in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, I don't know why. There's between commanders.
It's between the commanders. They don't know why, but it's between the commanders.
You are a soldier.
Women were torn to pieces. Women weren't allowed to study. Women had their breasts cut off. Women gave birth in taxis while being watched by crowds of people. Women were raped.
And this is the group of people, our generation of Afghanis. This is what they've gone through. This is the post-traumatic of war. Like, wow.
حالت که سابق سر مردم آمده بود کمک عیا در چشم مردم بود یا ترس بود راست بود. حالت که سابق سر مردم آمده بود کمک عیا در چشم مردم بود یا ترس بود.
There used to be a certain amount of dignity and a certain amount of morality.
راست بود. امروز همه چیز این مردم از پیش مردم گرفتن. واقعی تو یک زندگی.
It's not a
این
life.
زندگی نیست شمساری
It's a dishonor to Islam. AP AP, I think the world of you, buddy. I do. I think you got great messages. But again, I think your hate for Islam and their apologists who are ignorant and attack has rolled over to the people who have to suffer under these extremists. So these people, yes, want Islamic law. Yes, they want to live under Sharia law. But these groups like the Taliban and Mossad's group take it to a whole new extreme above that, and that's not what they want.
Most of the time, I really wish to delete from my memory part of my life which is really and extremely unpleasant. Mujahideen destroyed the dream of the nation.
Those who still are there should ask themselves what they are hoping for in a country where, according to Pew Research, 99% of the population wants Islamic Sharia law.
And not to the extreme that they have gotten.
Thousands lost their lives during the civil war in Afghanistan. Men, women, and children.
AP, I can't agree with you with your comments. I can't.
Let's
go back here so you can read this. This is the current conflict. This is 2001 on. This is from Blaze, and this is since 2001, since the U.S. has come over there, and ISIL and Al-Qaeda and Taliban have all been in hiding, fighting one another and fighting against the coalition forces. So let's hear what the Arab population, this is the Arab population.
In some ways, this feels like the scene of our decade, just rows and rows of white tents full of families who are fleeing violence. But this isn't Syria or Jordan or Greece. This is a war which is barely getting a mention anymore.
A war barely getting any mention anymore. So a war that no one really cares about anymore. A war where people are still suffering in the masses.
Kazim, an Afghan immigrant who fled Afghanistan in 2014 to the U.S.,
2014 flee, and they're still trying to flee.
Call for more measures to help those stranded.
The problem is when you go to the airport is locked down by Taliban. So you cannot enter to the airport. Bring those families here. Bring them home. They didn't deserve. They work with us. They work with American soldiers. They didn't deserve to stay there and die.
They didn't deserve to stay there and die. The Taliban is killing any people who worked with the Americans in the coalition. If you were an interpreter, you are being killed over there. If you worked as a secretary in any which way, you were killed. You're being killed over there. There are thousands of Afghanis trying to get back over here to North America, to the States, and their visas are backlogged, majorly backlogged. Go check it. AP, your comments are not completely factual, and you are jaded by your hate of the apologists and the religion itself. Look at what the people are going through. You guys get to see this firsthand.
When you look at Afghanistan, as soon as the American forces retreat, step back, get out, a major force like the Taliban, which was supposed to be the major enemy in the region, rapidly takes over the entire country. And that doesn't happen because they are so powerful and nobody can stop them. It happens because there is not very much resistance within the country.
As you saw, that's not true. Soon as they got the Russians out there and they got rid of the communist government, they went into a civil war. And we're going to see where the Taliban comes in soon, and they fought civil war. And now when the US came in and got rid of the Taliban in 2001, and no, I don't support that. I don't. So we're not getting into that, but I don't support that one. It's been the same thing. Different factions trying to jockey and get position of power.
Even though it's getting rapidly worse.
Commanders such as Ahmad Shah Massoud and Gulbuddin Hekmatyar were accused of war crimes against civilians, but none ever stood trial or admitted any culpability.
And yet we wonder why there's problems over there, because our westernized world fucked it up and we don't want to go fix it. We screwed it up, we made the mess over there, and we refuse to fix it.
So when America leaves this country alone, and then the Taliban rapidly takes over the entire country, that is not because of some major force that the Taliban possesses, it is because there is not much resistance within this country. Because the people of this country are not people who are very fond of being led by America and becoming like America.
True, they don't want to become like America, they want us to remain Islamic. Well, let's go and hear from Muslims. Let's hear from the Muslims population being affected
major
by this.
Force that the
They escaped. They had to try to escape. AP makes it sound like they're all there by choice, that they don't want to be, leaving. They have no choice for a lot of these people. Outside of money, they have no choice.
When the government was unable to help the provincial governor, Dr. Zia contacted wealthy friends. And within a week, they provided food, shelter, and medical care for the people who fled here.
So the government, their own government's not even taking care of them. The people who started this war, the United States, aren't taking care of them. People are having to call in rich, wealthy friends who fled to the westernized countries, like AP commented about. Like he comments about in his thing, they took off to the West, are helping the people there because they know there is no help for them.
In fact, I'm sorry to say this, but when America is there and when America tries to control Afghanistan, then the people are controlled by a force which they absolutely do not want.
Correct. They do not want, but what happens to them?
و همو جنگ و جدال و مثلا که از اغتشاشات که مثلا درباره ولسوالی ما مردم بود و مجبور شدن از دستشون رفت تا کسب کمالشون همه جا سرنگون شده ایستادن و معلوم نیست که حالات چه رقم میشه.
اگر رئیس دولت ما و شما اگر رئیس دولت اگر عادل باشه چی باشه.
Gandhi, we are in current times right now. The president who just gave up the seat to the Taliban, this is who he's talking about. So this is who he's talking about. If the president...
باید که همون مسلمان‌ها دا کمک کنیم. همون مسلمان‌ها دا یک چیزی بیتا. گریه میکنه. همین کمپر بیواها، همین اتما، همینو نمیشنوه. از این طرف طالب بزنه، این طرف دولت بزنه.
The Taliban is what? Taliban is killing us from the outside. So can't they hear our voices? The Taliban is killing us from one side. So AP, I think you're great. I love your videos, I love your channel, I love listening to you. But you tell me where these people go. You tell the world where these people go who are trapped, who have never been able to get out there because they don't have the money, they don't have the resources, and the U.S. is not allowing them in on visas. They're denying visas or stalling visas right now.
When the country is ruled by the Taliban, then people basically get what they want.
That's not what they want. Let's see what they're getting. That's where I get angry with you, AP. This little girl gets what she wants?
Shortly before we arrived in the countryside of Herat, where we filmed part of this report, a young woman was publicly flogged by a Taliban judge.
This is after the Taliban has taken back over the country in certain regions. So this is them taking certain towns over before they got to Kabul. So this is Mosul, if I'm not mistaken.
Her crime, indecency. She had allegedly spoken on the phone with a boy.
And she chose this? She chose this, AP?
If this woman had been married, she would likely have been stoned to death.
To our Western eyes and minds, that might be oppressive and brutal and authoritarian, but to them, it is what they expect.
And a lot of them don't. They're not wanting this. They want the Taliban gone too. They want a less extremist form.
As for women, they can come into my shop even if they're not accompanied by a man. They just have to wear a burqa and the Taliban won't stop them.
In the 2 days we spent in Omar Khair, we never saw a single woman in the market.
Not a single woman in the market.
Before, we couldn't drive our stock out of the city. The road was too dangerous. We had to make detours. Now everything is calm. When the Taliban arrived, they encouraged us to go to the mosque. They sent letters signed by a religious scholar which said that we were to tell them if our neighbors or friends didn't go and pray at the mosque.
They were encouraged to go to the mosque. If they didn't, they got reported. So they were commanded to go to the mosque. And what happened?
And then they'd go and pay them a visit.
In 1994, a new force emerged, the Taliban.
So here we are. This is our group. And how did this group here? This is our group, the Taliban. How did our group, the Taliban, emerge?
A name derived from the Arabic word for students. Many of its members came from Quranic schools.
So they were elitists. They were the clerics. And they were making the same promise that Mossad's group made. And let's see what happened.
The Taliban promised to restore peace, order, and morality in Afghanistan. And after their first military victories, they enjoyed massive support from Pakistan.
Massive support from Pakistan.
The burgeoning movement was also joined by thousands of orphans and other young men who had grown up in the refugee camps in Pakistan.
So here we are. This is the group growing up from the refugee camps. We saw the indoctrination, process earlier.
A generation of Islamic fundamentalists was mobilized and on the march.
Saying and preaching, they will come and they will bring justice.
And who are we to forcibly free people from the oppression they themselves want?
It's not what they want.
My mother got so emotional. It's great that the Taliban are here. The war is going to end and we're going to have peace. She cried for joy. The Taliban are coming. The Taliban are going to save our lives and the civil war will be over.
They thought the civil war was going to be over between all the factions that were fighting for power after the communists were removed from the power struggle. They promised a different regime, a different way of life, and the people wanted that and wanted to support it. And this is what AP said they wanted, and find out what happened, because they thought what they wanted and why they were happy when the Taliban was removed. And yes, no, they still didn't want the US.
We invited an Irish gentleman who was in charge of his security and the UN for dinner because he had letters from my father. He had a very positive sort of overview of the situation, saying there will be a change, that there will be an end to the Mujahideen era.
So the Taliban's promising there's going to be an end and they're telling the UN, and the UN's related to her because her father's hiding in the UN right now, UN building.
And I remember asking this gentleman, so does that mean that he will be out? He said, yes, we hope that your father will be out very soon.
Taliban take the ball.
And then when I was in school, I was called saying, we have bad news, we need to go home. So I picked up my other sisters, spoke to the teachers, we got home, and then I heard the news on BBC.
And she heard the news on BBC, what the Taliban did, and what did they freaking do?
Overnight, they dragged the former president, Saeed Mohammed Najibullah, from a United Nations compound. He was beaten, shot, and his body hung from a lamppost.
They broke UN resolutions. They broke into the UN assembly and drug him to the streets and hung him. They hung him. No trial.
I called up the UN, and they were saying, sorry, we cannot do anything. And I was very angry, and I said, well, at least you could have called us up and informed us.
They didn't even get a call from the UN to say that their embassy had been breached. Their embassy had been breached by international violation, and the family of the president of the Communist Party, and still at the time legally the president of the country, was executed by the Taliban, and they didn't even have the nerve or respect to let the family know.
It's really against the message They say they will bring justice, but the former president was been killed without justice, without court.
The Taliban changed the face of Afghanistan. They banned alcohol, films, and all forms of entertainment.
Now the Taliban...
This isn't what they wanted. This is not what the people wanted. This is what they got fooled, like they got fooled by Mossad. They thought they were getting a true Islamic government who cared about the people and about Islam. Islam means peace. Islam is peace.
Now the Taliban is an extremist Islamist force. They did terrible things in the past, oppressed people in the past. There was a long history to it.
Their own ferocious brand of fundamentalism, hanging television sets in the streets as a warning to sinners, cutting the heads off graven images.
As a warning to sinners.
When the Taliban arrived, the civil war ended. They brought us peace, but took away our freedom.
They brought us peace, but took away our freedom.
A country at peace, but without freedom is not a country.
Suffered most. They faced arbitrary beatings and were forbidden to study or work. Girls were banned from school.
امیالی که چی طالبا در انقلاب اسلامی مکتبای ما را که بسته کرده ما جگرخون هستیم خاطر که جگرخون هستیم که مکتبای ما را بسته کرده بی سواد میمانیم.
Where is your male escort? Why are your feet and nails visible? Why is your burqa so short? Why is your hand showing? It was like all the women of Afghanistan were thrown into a dark prison cell, myself included.
And AP, again, I'm sorry, you're trying to say the people chose this. No, they didn't choose this. They got left behind by the U.S. The U.S. was supposed to go in there and help them. The U.S. screwed them over. Even Mossad said the U.S. screwed them over, and this is what resulted. The people did not want this. They've never been able to get away from it. It's something, and we just ignore it.
Afghanistan became a hotbed of Islamic fundamentalism, and it was under the Taliban's protection that Osama bin Laden returned to the country. After waging war against the Soviets, bin Laden had founded the Al-Qaeda terror network to carry out a global jihad. In Afghanistan, he set up training camps for terrorists and prepared the next step, an attack against the US.
And we're not getting into that whatsoever.
The people who were in the plane who committed suicide and killed more than 3,000 people in New York, none of them were Afghan.
None were Afghan. The only problem the U.S. had was the Taliban, which they helped create, so causing the problem with backing Mossad. So, and them trying to get him out there, took Osama in and helped. That's all I'm going to say.
The United States of America makes the following demands on the Taliban.
On the Taliban.
Deliver to United States authorities all the leaders of Al-Qaeda who hide in your land.
And this is what it's about. So they're going to punish the people because they allowed the Taliban to take over for so long without stopping them. And now they're pissed off because it's come back to bite them in the ass, and they're about to cause more problems, which leads us to today.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
Hate that, man. Hate them. This is what you did to that country.
I don't know if I knew the news exactly on 11 or 12th, because there were no national TV during the Taliban time because they think pictures are haram.
And you gotta think here, the U.S. didn't give a shit about these guys. The U.S. only gave a shit in the 80s when Russia came in, and it was the Cold War still. Once the Cold War was over and Russia left, they gave zero shit what happened in Afghanistan. Soon as the Taliban gave birth to Al-Qaeda and allowed them to launch from there, then they gave a shit about Afghanistan again, and only because they got attacked by a non-Afghani. So he was a Saudi Arabian, a Saudi. So, and the poor people didn't even know. They had no clue what was going on because they were restricted by the Taliban and oppressed by the Taliban. And did the U.S. ever try to help them before that? No. Never gave them a second look in the world.
The armed groups have disrupted and endangered farming communities who already live in poverty. When Aga Jan was forced out of his home by fighting between ISIL and Taliban factions, he rescued as many local children as he could and fled to the safety of nearby Jalalabad city.
Yeah, so listen to these little kids, listen to this man. Are these people that want to live under that? Are these the people that chose this before? These are people who are terrified of the Taliban in the little towns before they even got to Mosul and Kabul. So, like, this is absolutely, I can't believe that AP's comments.
They tend their livestock. Life becomes a constant struggle.
Look at that little girl. She's got tears. The little girl's got tears coming down her eyes over what's happening. And yet we have AP saying these are the people who chose to be there, chose to accept this, and they want this. No, they don't want this form of militancy. So they want a less militant form of their religion. Because neither the Taliban nor ISIL care about ordinary Afghans. Neither. And you wonder why the people are staying there, and yet AP says this is their choice. They had the choice to leave. We saw those who tried, got stuck in refugee camps, and birthed the Taliban. So birthed our problem today. Birthed our today's terrorists. Here's people saying if they try to leave, they're losing their kids. The kids are being kidnapped and taken from them. Their husbands are being taken and kidnapped from them if they try to speak out or leave. So we accept all the hardships for their sake.
Extremist groups signal they come back as the Taliban consolidates control over Afghanistan just days after U.S. troops withdrew from the country. With signs of more violence, there's growing possibility of clashes among extremist groups, as well as a civil war among the Taliban and opposing militant groups.
And here we are within the last week. The Taliban has taken back over, no different than when the Russians pulled out and then Mossad's group jumped right on the gun to take over the country. And as soon as he did, a bunch of other factions jumped in to try to take over the country, and they ended up in civil war, and that formed the Taliban, and the Taliban came out in power until the U.S. ousted them in 2001 after 9/11. And here we are back in 2021, August of 21, back here again.
They have come back and they have said that they have changed, that they want to
I agree. No, they
approach
haven't.
things more peacefully. Of course, that's all bullshit. They will
regain
agree.
Their
power and then impose their strict laws upon everybody again and seek to expand their Islamist ideology.
Correct, they will, and the people don't want that. The people are terrified, and the people are fleeing. Watch the news.
They call themselves the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, and their goal is to establish Islam fully and purely and to spread Islam. The Taliban is not like ISIS. They belong to different ideologies.
And this is important. I left here. This is important. Because here what happens, this is how much they hate the westernized world. How much they hate them.
And they don't even like each other. And that is not because one is peaceful and the other is not. No, they are both terrible.
Yes, they are, and yes, they do both hate each other. But let's see what happens over historical time in the last 20 years.
The team is heading to a place called Chapadara. Until recently, it was a Taliban stronghold. But the fighters there have changed allegiance and joined ISIL.
So they hate each other, they can't stand each other, different ideologies, but when it comes to fighting against the US, they are more than willing to help each other because it's still in the name of Islam, even though different ideologies.
But they belong to different Islamic schools of theology.
They do.
Groups like ISIS follow the Salafi or Wahhabi ideology, whereas the Taliban follows a Deobandi ideology, which is a distinct regional ideology that
Agreed.
is not based on traditionalist Islam, but rather on a form of theology which those traditionalist groups like ISIS consider corrupt.
I agree.
The Wall Street Journal reported Tuesday pro-Al-Qaeda social media accounts published messages congratulating, quote, the brothers in the Taliban.
Congratulating their brothers in the Taliban. Even though they hate each other, even though they have different ideologies, they come together in one common interest, and that is to oust the Western world, the United States. And you just saw that they are making media accounts. And what's the Westernized world doing right now in response to it?
More financial measures are likely to be imposed by Western capitals as they put pressure on the Taliban's leaders. They promise to form an inclusive government and ensure the nation won't become a safe haven for other armed groups.
They're promising not to go back to their old ways. So practicing not to go back to their old ways, and the westernized world trying to stop that from happening and avoid a big war. And they're basically doing what they did in 90, is just fucking off and leaving the Afghani people to their own. But listen.
India-based The Hindu reported that members of the so-called Islamic State extremist group have already entered Kabul. The Taliban have reportedly fired into a crowd of people who had taken down an Afghan Taliban flag in the eastern city of Jalalabad on Wednesday, killing at least 2 people, according to multiple media reports in the country.
And this is important. This is important. Because what happened when the U.S. backed up Mossad and they threw out the Russians, and then they went and got rid of the Communist Party? So in Afghanistan, they fell into civil war. They fell into a civil war, and the Taliban arose. Now the Taliban is facing the same thing. So 20, 30 years later, 30 years later, here we are again, the same thing.
A video circulating on social media showed the crowd dispersing as the sound of gunshots rang out. This comes amid growing fears that a civil war will break out in Afghanistan as a movement centered on anti-Taliban militants grows.
A civil war is going to pop out again. It's about to pop out again.
Meanwhile, many thousands of Afghans who worked for Western embassies and organizations remain stranded, as access to airports in Kabul have been cut off after the Taliban erected checkpoints to prevent any Afghans attempting to leave.
And yet AP said they had their chances to leave before. They're there by choice. Too bad for them. Suck it up. And we heard from 73 on, they have had a hard time escaping their country. They've had to be smuggled out. They've had to run across borders and lose family members to death trying to flee from their civil wars and the Taliban.
And the International Monetary Fund has suspended payment of more than $460 million for Afghanistan as part of a coronavirus relief program.
So here we got the poor people of Afghanistan having to deal with a group like the Taliban coming back into power, with the US and everyone else turning their backs on them yet again. They're about to suffer persecution yet again in a extremist version of Islam they do not want. They want Islam. They want to live by Islamic law, not extremist Islamic law. As we heard, there were women who were beat for following Islamic law, but their burqa wasn't the right size, or their nails were showing, or they didn't have a male with them and they were beat. So for it, This is the problem. People don't want that extremist view. Not all Islamic countries are like that. So there are other Islamic countries that are more liberal and still follow Islamic law, and they would not accept this. AP, again, I think you are a wonderful guy, but your view of the people are jaded by your view of the apologists and the religion itself. I distaste, I hate, I loathe the leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, and I loathe the leaders of all other Christian churches. I don't loathe the people. I don't loathe the members. I feel sorry for the members because they have been deceived and brainwashed and don't know any better. And they're not even in the same boat as the people of Afghanistan, where they are unable to flee because there's checkpoints keeping them there. They have visas, been trying to get out for a decade now on visas to the U.S., and the U.S. has been dragging its feet and not allowing them into the country. This is all verifiable stuff. You can find the links down at my bottom, so they are there. And now you guys know what's happening in Afghanistan and the history and why AP is wrong. Though he is right, they don't want the westernized world there. He is wrong in every other aspect. So if you guys disagree with me, provide your links in the bottom, provide your evidence. I hope you guys got something out of this. Until later, this was the Atheist Apostate saying peace out and take care.